Semen retention is more than just a practice of physical control. It is a spiritual signal, an invitation to rise above the animalistic layers of the self. Most people perceive retention only in terms of benefits like energy, motivation, or confidence. But its deeper purpose lies hidden, awaiting the man ready to evolve. When a man consciously holds his seed, he steps into an ancient path that transforms him from a creature of impulse into a being of intention. This journey is not about suppression, it is about sacred redirection. The seed is a sacred carrier of not just life, but also spiritual memory. Within it are encoded ancestral imprints, soul codes, and divine patterns that mirror the higher self. Retention begins the process of unlocking these codes. It's as if nature placed within man a hidden key to awakening, but that key remains dormant unless respected and preserved. When wasted in indulgence, that key becomes dull. When guarded, it begins to glow with unseen intelligence. As the modern world continues to descend into hyperstimulation and instant gratification, fewer men hear this inner call. Yet those who do often feel it before they understand it. It starts as a whisper, a discomfort with meaningless pleasure, a subtle yearning for depth, a pull towards silence. That whisper is the soul inviting the man inward, not to reject life, but to refine it. And retention becomes the very first gate he must walk through. The physical retention of semen serves as the outer symbol of an inner shift. It marks the transition from reacting to choosing, from consuming to cultivating. This act of conscious non-release is not about fear of women, sex, or life. It's about creating space within for something higher to emerge. The space that once leaked away through unconscious pleasure becomes fertile ground for the soul to grow roots. This path is not for the many, but for the ready. Retention does not reward the one who merely counts days. It opens realms for the one who walks it with reverence. It is a posture, an orientation of the spirit. It whispers to the universe, I am ready to receive something greater. I am ready to evolve, not just in body, but in being. Energy as a spiritual currency. Energy is not just the power to do more. It's the currency through which our soul interacts with life. When a man retains his seed, he doesn't just store biological material. He begins to accumulate spiritual energy. This subtle force begins to change his perception, emotions, thoughts, and presence. His aura thickens. His silence deepens. But this energy is not meant to be hoarded. It is meant to be transmuted. Transmutation is the alchemical art of converting lower impulses into higher awareness. It is not a mental exercise, but a lived experience. The energy that was once directed outward toward physical release now begins to spiral upward through the spine. It nourishes the brain, the heart, and the soul. With continued practice, the man begins to feel more connected to life, not in a frantic way, but in a still, rooted way. This energy becomes sacred currency, and like any currency, it must be used wisely. Some use it to deepen meditation, others to pursue their soul's calling, some to serve others with love. But all must remember, this energy demands direction. Without guidance, it turns back inward and creates restlessness, frustration, or temptation. Retention does not make you immune to darkness. It gives you the light to navigate it. As the man matures in his practice, he begins to feel things he never felt. He becomes more sensitive to people's energy, more intuitive in silence, more detached from drama. This is not weakness, it is refinement. His inner senses sharpen. He begins to see through illusion. He hears the tone behind words. He senses truth behind masks. This heightened awareness is not a gift. It's a result of conscious redirection. In this way, semen retention becomes the art of managing one's spiritual currency. It is not about denying pleasure, but about investing in purpose. The soul does not seek constant stimulation. It seeks alignment, and energy is the bridge. When guarded, energy builds. When directed, it creates. When surrendered to higher purpose, it awakens the divine, facing the shadows within. Semen retention is not always blissful. It is often a mirror. In the early stages, many men experience intense emotional turbulence, sudden anger, sadness, confusion, or cravings. These are not signs of failure. They are signs that the deeper work has begun. When a man stops numbing himself with release, the unconscious patterns and buried wounds rise to the surface. Childhood trauma, unmet needs, suppressed guilt, or addictive behaviors come into view. These shadows were always there. Retention simply removes the veil. And this is where many turn back. But those who continue realize this is not punishment, this is purification. The soul cannot evolve while carrying unconscious burdens. Facing the shadow requires courage. It is not about fighting your darkness. It's about embracing it with awareness. Each craving becomes a teacher. Each restless night, a lesson. Each emotional wave, a message. The retained man learns to listen inwardly, to sit with discomfort, and to find wisdom within it. His seed becomes a container, not just for life, but for self-examination. The deeper he goes, the more he sheds. Pride begins to soften. Arrogance dissolves. Superficial desires lose their grip. What remains is raw, real, and sacred. He starts to see himself not as a victim of urges, but as a vessel for evolution. This shift changes everything, not just how he sees himself, but how he treats others. Compassion grows. Patience deepens. The ego loosens. This is the alchemical process of retention. Darkness is not denied but transformed. Pain is not escaped but transcended. Lust is not suppressed but sublimated. The soul does not evolve in denial. It evolves in the fire of truth. Retention, when approached with sincerity, forces a man to meet his unhealed parts. And in doing so, he begins to reclaim his original wholeness. Magnetic alignment and universal trust. One of the most mystical aspects of semen retention is the way it aligns a man with universal intelligence. As he lets go of superficial desires, he begins to attract deeper synchronicities. People, opportunities, ideas, and insights start to flow to him, not because he is chasing them, but because he is aligned. This is not magic, it is magnetic alignment. When a man retains with intention, he sharpens his internal compass. His decisions are no longer reactive but intuitive. He stops wasting energy on empty connections and begins investing in meaningful ones. The universe responds not to desperation, but to clarity, and the retained man becomes clear, not through control, but through surrender to something higher. This surrender creates trust. A man who retains begins to trust life more, not because everything is easy, but because he begins to see meaning in everything. Rejections become redirections, delays become teachings. His energy begins to resonate with the frequency of truth, and in that frequency, only what serves him can stay. This isn't forceful discipline, it's divine rhythm. This magnetic presence is felt by others, especially women. It's not about looks, words, or status. It's about essence. People feel that this man is anchored in something invisible but undeniable. He doesn't seek attention, but his presence commands it. He doesn't chase, but life flows toward him. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. And what is he aligned to? His soul, his highest path, his divine purpose. Retention becomes the tuning fork that brings him back into harmony with the universe. In this state, manifestation becomes effortless, not because he manipulates reality, but because he becomes worthy of receiving what's meant for him. He becomes a participant in divine timing, not a prisoner of his cravings. Sacred masculinity and divine union. In the journey of retention, masculinity itself transforms. No longer driven by dominance, lust, or control, the retained man begins to embody sacred masculinity, a force that protects, creates, and uplifts. He no longer defines himself by performance or conquest, but by presence and depth. He becomes rooted like a mountain and flowing like a river. This new masculinity is not soft. It is stable. It does not react. It responds. It does not fear emotion. It honors it. Retention gives a man the power to hold space, not just for himself, but for others. In relationships, he no longer seeks validation, but connection. He doesn't manipulate, he mirrors. He doesn't compete, he collaborates. This shift brings healing to the feminine around him. Women sense this. They feel safe, not because he is perfect, but because he is present. They feel honored, not objectified. In his silence, they feel heard. In his gaze, they feel seen. In his restraint, they feel respected. Retention rewires how a man relates to the feminine, not just externally, but within himself. He integrates his inner feminine and thus becomes whole. This wholeness allows for true union, not just sexual, but spiritual. When two whole beings come together, love becomes sacred. Desire becomes devotion. Intimacy becomes prayer. Retention prepares a man for this level of union, not through repression, but through refinement. He becomes capable of sustaining. In this way, semen retention becomes a gateway to divine union. It helps the masculine evolve into a vessel of love, strength, and wisdom. It is not about being above women, it's about being in balance with them. The retained man is not detached from life. He is more deeply woven into it. And in his presence, the sacred returns to the space between man and woman, awakening psychic sensitivity and inner guidance. As the practice of semen retention matures, it begins to activate dormant faculties within the human energy system. Most notably, the subtle centers of intuition, perception, and spiritual insight. This is not superstition, it's energetic intelligence. The same vital energy once flowing downward is now rerouted upward, nourishing the third eye and crown chakras. The mind becomes still, and in that stillness, the inner voice becomes louder. This inner voice is not fantasy, it is the compass of your higher self. It speaks not in emotion, but in knowing. You begin to sense outcomes before they occur, feel others' intentions before they're expressed, and navigate life not only with logic, but with spiritual clarity. This shift is the fruit of conservation, not just of seed, but of sacred focus. When the noise of indulgence is silenced, the soul begins to whisper. Many men begin to experience precognitive dreams, synchronicities that feel divinely timed, or a sudden capacity to read between the lines of people and situations. This is not ego inflation, it's subtle perception. Retention fine-tunes your nervous system, making you a better listener of the unseen. This psychic tuning is not to be flaunted, but honored. It exists to guide you toward Dharma, not to inflate your sense of power. But with these gifts comes responsibility. You are no longer walking blindly. You are now navigating with divine tools, and the path demands integrity. Retention in this context isn't only about spiritual evolution. It's about energetic discernment. What you watch, who you engage with, what conversations you entertain, everything starts to shape your inner frequency. Psychic refinement requires spiritual hygiene. The man who walks this path long enough becomes a spiritual antenna, a receiver of the divine frequency. He begins to live in rhythm with cosmic will. He doesn't force decisions. He feels when to move and when to wait. He doesn't chase but magnetizes. His clarity becomes protection. His intuition becomes a compass. And his psychic awakening becomes a tool for greater service, not for pride, but for purpose. Karmic detox and ancestral healing. One of the most underestimated powers of semen retention is its ability to cleanse karmic imprints and ancestral patterns carried unconsciously through generations. The male lineage often holds unresolved trauma, addictive cycles, emotional suppression, or violence. These patterns are not just mental, they are energetic, and semen is one of the deepest carriers of such karmic blueprints. When a man chooses retention with intention, he is not just cleansing his body, he is purifying his bloodline. Unconsciously passed down programs begin to rise into awareness. His sudden resistance to lust, cravings, or distraction is not just personal, it's ancestral. The war he fights in silence is the war his forefathers never could. Retention becomes a portal to healing not just for himself, but for those who came before him. This detox process can be intense. Sudden flashbacks, vivid dreams, emotional outbursts, or deep sadness may arise. Not always from this life, but from inherited pain. The retained man becomes the healer of his masculine lineage. This is sacred work. As he breaks patterns within himself, he liberates generations of suppressed masculine energy. This is how family karma transforms, through conscious presence. The practice also refines his perception of forgiveness. He stops blaming his father, or society, or past relationships. Instead, he begins to see the bigger picture, that everyone was doing their best with what they knew. Retention brings clarity and compassion. He no longer walks as a victim of fate, but as a liberator of lineage. His healing becomes a gift to his future children, his community, and the collective masculine field. In this way, semen retention is not selfish. It is ancestral service. It is karmic cleansing. It is emotional alchemy. The man who undertakes this work with sincerity becomes a channel for purification. He becomes a guardian of the sacred, and his life begins to reflect this new vibrational freedom. Peace enters where chaos once ruled, and love flows where resentment. Creative explosion and divine purpose. One of the most radiant expressions of retained energy is the spontaneous surge of creativity. When the life force is not spent through physical release, it seeks new paths of expression. Art, music, invention, writing, leadership, or even silent innovation. These are the new outlets. Creativity is not random. It is the soul trying to express itself in form, and semen retention fuels this emergence. This creative explosion isn't forced. It arrives naturally. The man feels a desire to build, to shape, to offer. His ideas begin to feel more alive. His actions become infused with intention. He finds joy not in consuming content, but in creating it. His hands become extensions of his spirit, and his work begins to carry something others can feel, but cannot explain. Why does this happen? Because semen, in its highest essence, is raw creative energy. When retained and refined, it awakens the very codes that built the body and brain and redirects them toward divine output. The retained man becomes a vessel through which higher intelligence can flow. He is no longer just productive, he is co-creating with the universe. This creativity is not always loud or visible. It could be the creativity of healing a family pattern, or building a new routine, or reimagining one's purpose. Retention doesn't just make you more artistic, it makes you more alive. It returns you to the frequency of pure potential, and from this place your life becomes your canvas. The retained man must honor this gift, use it, channel it, sculpt it into something beautiful. Creative stagnation leads to inner frustration, but when he offers his gifts to the world with humility, he fulfills the soul's purpose. Retention becomes not a weight to carry, but a river to release. And what flows from him is not just talent, but truth. Time expansion and the slowing of life. Another deep but rarely discussed transformation of semen retention is its impact on time perception. As inner clarity increases and mind chatter decreases, the man begins to feel like time slows down. He notices more, experiences more, lives more. Not because the clock has changed, but because he has stepped out of chaos into presence. This time expansion is sacred. In a world rushing toward nowhere, the retained man walks slowly but consciously. He sips his tea with gratitude. He watches the sunrise in silence. He listens without planning his reply. He is not behind schedule. He is aligned with divine rhythm. In retention, life stops being a checklist and becomes a meditation. Why does this happen? Because release scatters awareness. It fragments time into moments of craving and chasing. But retention brings coherence. The man's nervous system calms. His mind stops racing. His inner tempo syncs with nature. He begins to live by the breath, not the clock. His days may not get longer, but they feel fuller. This shift also enhances decision-making. No longer pressured by urgency, he chooses with clarity. He is no longer running to catch up. He is choosing what truly matters. Time, once a source of stress, becomes a companion. He doesn't kill time, he honors it. This reverence changes his vibration, and life begins to mirror his new calm. In this expanded perception of time, the soul finds room to grow. Stillness becomes sacred, moments become eternal, and retention becomes the portal through which the man reclaims his rhythm, his awareness, and his inner timekeeper. This is not about being slow, it's about being present. and in presence, eternity is touched. The hero's isolation and the divine companion. There comes a point on the retention journey where the man feels deeply alone, not just physically but spiritually. Friends no longer resonate. Family can't relate. The world seems caught in illusions he no longer chases. This stage is not a mistake. It is the hero's isolation. Every soul walking the path of transformation must pass through it. In this solitude, many turn back. The silence feels heavy. The lack of validation feels painful. But those who stay discover something extraordinary. Within the silence is a presence, a divine companion, a force that begins to walk beside them, not in words but in warmth. The loneliness transforms into sacred aloneness. And in that space, the man meets God. This divine presence is subtle. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives with stillness. As the man lets go of the need to be seen, he begins to be known, not by the world, but by the source of life itself. Retention sharpens this awareness. It cleans the lens through which the soul perceives the infinite. And what felt like abandonment, the hero's isolation is the womb of rebirth. It is where the false dies and the truth is born. The man who walks through it becomes unshakable. He no longer fears solitude because he knows he is never truly alone. The divine speaks in silence, walks in steps, breathes in breath, and the retained man begins to sense it everywhere. In the end, the journey is never about being separate from life. It's about becoming intimate with the source of it. The retained man emerges from solitude not broken, but initiated. He is no longer seeking light. He is radiating it. His isolation becomes his strength, and his companionship with the divine becomes his deepest union. The evolution of the eternal self. Semen retention is not just a practice, it is a path, a sacred, solitary, and often challenging path toward soul evolution. It is the journey of turning away from the surface and walking toward the center. It does not promise comfort, but it guarantees growth. The man who walks it sincerely begins to notice that he is no longer who he was. Something ancient is awakening in him. This ancient force is not new. It is the eternal self, the soul that existed before this body and will continue after. Retention helps peel away the layers that covered it, the conditioning, the lust, the fear, the doubt. And as those layers fall, the man begins to live from essence, not ego. His actions carry weight. His words carry silence. His presence carries truth. He realizes that he was never just holding seed. He was holding potential, divine potential. And as he continues the path, that potential begins to take form in his creativity, in his service, in his love, in his silence. The soul does not evolve through avoidance. It evolves through alchemy, and retention is one of the oldest alchemical tools known to the masculine spirit. This is the hidden invitation behind retention, not just to become better, but to become whole, to remember, to return, to rise. The soul evolution it invites is not dramatic, but eternal. It is not for applause, but for awakening. And for the man who accepts it, every moment becomes sacred. Every breath, a prayer. Every urge, a portal. Every silence, a step deeper into his soul. So if you hear the call, honor it. Walk the path with humility. Return to your essence with grace. Retention is not the destination, it is the doorway. And beyond that doorway lies the truth of who you are. Eternal, infinite,